All right, guys. So continuing on with the best tactics, SOPs, TTPs that I've seen in person. So we'll kind of talk about this. These will be from my first deployment, since essentially I used up the best ones from my second deployment already. So my first deployment would have been the middle of June 2004 till early February, late January 2005. It included Operation Phantom Fury, so the big major assault there in November and December of 2004. And so the first one is going to be what is essentially just standard like armor infiltration, however adapted to the situation at hand and kind of modified for what we were doing. So if you guys don't know, so the end of the spring of 2004, so after the quote-unquote siege earlier in 2004, which would have been right before my unit got there, we kind of had a period of roughly 6 months where the quote-unquote Fallujah brigade of Iraqis were going to take over Fallujah and man it. And so basically the coalition presence in Fallujah didn't exist outside of special operations type of missions. There was no standard presence there. So they used that time to basically build up the entire city into as much of a fortress as they could, which included lots of pre-placed IEDs, obviously, but pre-placed car bombs. We even saw things as drastic as, in no exaggeration, where they literally had an entire block, and they basically had dug or drilled holes, and they had planted individual 155s at intervals around an entire block, and then huge daisy chain, big IEDs, especially in the southern part of the city, where it's still really compact, but there tends to be not as many of the taller buildings as the northwest part of the city, but a lot more dirt floors, dirt roads, things like that, where it's easier to dig and plant things like that. And so as part of the assault, so I was the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, India Company, obviously, and so we had the Army's 2-7 Cav was next to us, amongst us, in front of us, behind us, kind of depends on the day and the mission. But so basically what their mission is, so we took over this train station in the north part of the city, our Lima company did, and then they had built up a big anti-tank berm, between the train station and the city. So we had armored, we had combat earth movers come in, make a hole. And then so what the Army did is they essentially poured a bunch of their big armor tanks and Bradleys in there. And if you don't know, it's an Army, armored division, or in this case, an armored combat regiment, armored cavalry regiment rather, they bring by far the most ass to the fight of any of the elements in the military. As per their mission, they have main battle tanks, they have Bradleys, they have main battle tanks that have the you've seen them, the big earth mover, the minesweeper skids and all sorts of stuff like that. They have their own self-propelled mobile artillery, all those sort of things. So as far as pure supporting arms, they bring a ton of it. And so the idea was that in the northern part of the city, the initial part of the city, they were going to essentially infiltrate, i.e. they were going to move their way on the roads through that part of the city. And the goal was to, first of all, to identify these big IEDs, big IED ambushes and stuff like that. And one, if you can identify it, you can engage it with, either the 50 cal or with the 120 main gun and just set it off. That was, common tactic. Or I guess you could call it an arty or air on certain things like that too, if you needed to. Or secondarily, would be for them to essentially just draw the IED onto themselves, especially for smaller IEDs. And with the Abrams, they're pretty impervious to, anything but, an explosively formed penetrator, like a shape charge, a really big, humongous daisy chain IED, or something right underneath them. They are mine protected, but something right underneath them could hurt them. But so for the most part, impervious to most of those things. And so the idea was to essentially draw those big major explosives, so the things that would pose the largest single potential causer of casualties for the infantry, for the grunts like myself, to draw it on themselves, and then let us do the squeegee clearing of the buildings and fight the enemy, infantry, face to face. And so obviously worked really well. I can't remember honestly hitting any IEDs or anything like that. The only IEDs or things that we hit were booby traps that were inside of buildings, or guys with suicide vests, that attacked us in buildings, things like that. And then kind of keeping with that, another thing that they would do is they essentially kind of drove into certain parts of the city during this. And tanks always operate with a wingman, so there's always at least 2 tanks whenever you see them. They don't like to be alone because they are still vulnerable. Maybe not for being catastrophically knocked out, but for throwing a track or something like that and being stranded out there. And so they would kind of find advantageous places and sort of just park and basically let dudes come to them. If you want to get a couple of your buddies together with RPGs and go attack an M1, that's that's your call, and you're pretty much all going to get smoked because they have such awesome thermals. They have the like computer controlled like 50 cal, which is basically used like a sniper rifle. And so that worked really well. Let us do our mission while we were infiltrating through the north part of the city, because our mission was to infiltrate through the northern part of the city, let 3-5 clear the Joe Lawn area after we passed through it, and then we were going to squeegee clear the southwest part, which is Queens, and stuff like that. So that worked incredibly well. We passed those guys on mid-morning of the first day in Joe Lawn Park itself. Because I remember, because it's just kind of a funny story, I guess I'll add. So as we're passing them, we were about to get on this road, and within about 5 minutes, we were going to be in just humongous all-out contact. But we'd been in sporadic, like, kind of contact up till this point. So we passed these guys. I remember I'm coming past this Bradley, and he's hitting his coax down the street, and he's here like brat, brat, and I'm like, oh shit, what's going on? And so I look over there, and there's no shit. There's a dude down there like 100 yards away, and this guy is going like, and then jumping back. And so every time he'd jump out, this gunner was hitting his coax, and the guy would jump back. And at least for like the 2 or 3 bursts I was there, he hadn't hit him yet. So I thought that was pretty funny. So then kind of moving on. So same deployment. So obviously we got into a ton of really nasty, close-quartered, really confined combat. And again, I've explained this in other videos. I don't like to describe it as CQB, because I think CQB, it conjures up in the mind, the really well orchestrated like entry tactics and these sort of things. And obviously we did some of that stuff, but like we took so many casualties, and also like the mission required us to clear so many buildings and so many rooms. We couldn't really always follow, or not a lot of times not at all. We couldn't follow sort of the like standard rules of like never entering a room alone, never entering a building with less than 4 to 6 guys, basic things. We kind of just had to do what we had to do. And so kind of a couple like molded tactics that we sort of came up with that worked really well for some of those things, or like one like clearing things from the breach, that became really important. But and again, like a lot of this isn't going to be like now it's kind of standard practice. But so one thing that we did a lot of were the Marine Corps has organically, we have the SMAW, the Mark 153, which is a rocket launcher. The Army has like the SMAW-D, the disposable version, and they have the Carl Gustav, which serves essentially the same role, but it's, we use them as like anti-structure rockets. So we had HE rockets, and then we had these new ones, called NE rounds, novel explosive, which is a thermobaric, which is essentially, it's got an increased blast pressure. It's supposed to be for attacking confined areas. So one thing that we used a lot with our rocket guys, our O351s, our assaultmen, were that we would hit buildings with an HE, blow a hole, and then we would put an NE through that, so that some of the lesser well-built structures, smaller structures, you could just get them to collapse in on each other. Then you can go over and throw grenades or shoot a dude stuck in the rubble. That was really cool. Or run them over with bulldozers. And so that worked really well. Like the blowing of additional holes, and also to kind of pair with that is the blowing of additional breach points. The enemy's not as stupid as you want them to be sometimes, most of the time, and so if you're going to go in the doors that are there, they're always going to be covered by fire. And then when you've been in Iraqi houses, they're all made of like bricks, that mud brick stuff, that you've all seen. And so like rounds obviously don't really get absorbed by that for the most part. So if you got a guy who's at the end of the hallway and he's shooting down at you, essentially anything that hits the wall gets thrown your way as far as shrapnel, and spall and stuff like that. So not to like give people an excuse not to aim, but like if you're at the end of the hallway, like shooting at somebody who is in the middle of the hallway or in the middle of the doorway in the hallway or whatever, like chances that you hit him with something when you're like cracking down that with automatic fire is pretty fucking high. So you need to find additional breach points. But the other thing that's really common to them, probably it's definitely the rule, not the exception, is that all their windows are barred. Like everybody's windows are barred, so you can never really breach the windows. So you have to blow additional points, or back a tank, back a bulldozer or something, and create a new point to go in and make entry. And so those are kind of particularly like effective tactics for us. I think I'll turn this into like a third part as well, because this has gone on so long. Remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.